My sister stood at our father's grave and cried. 1 week later, she pulled out a will that cut me out of everything he had ever promised me. She thought she'd committed the perfect crime. What she didn't count on was a shaky signature on a tiny $12 check exposing her entire web of lies. This isn't just about a stolen inheritance. It's about how the smallest detail can unravel the biggest betrayals and drag a dark secret into the light. Growing up, my sister Claire and I were never the closest, but we were family, held together by our father. He was our anchor, a man who built a successful business from scratch and always told us that one day it would be ours to share. He wasn't a man of grand gestures, just quiet promises. "This is all for you and your sister," he'd say, waving a hand over the workshop he'd built. "You'll both be taken care of." That was his promise, solid as the ground under our feet. For years, I believed him. I worked right alongside him, learning the business. Claire was never that interested in the day-to-day, so she went off and lived her own life, always knowing she had a safety net. We had our disagreements, sure, like any family, but I never once doubted her love for our dad, or the sense of fairness he tried to instill in us. Then, Dad got sick. It started small, a tremor in his hand, a forgotten word. The diagnosis was cruel, a degenerative illness that would slowly steal his strength and his mind. As his health went downhill, Claire started coming around more, a lot more. She moved closer, took over his doctor's appointments, and managed his daily care. At first, honestly, it felt like a relief. I was completely overwhelmed, trying to keep the business afloat while raising my own young family. It looked like Claire was finally stepping up, and I was grateful. But then, things started to feel off. When I'd call Dad, she'd often intercept. "He's resting," she'd say, her voice just a little too cheerful. My visits became scheduled, supervised. Claire insisted on handling all his finances, claiming it was too much for him. It all happened so slowly that it was easy to brush off my own unease. I told myself it was for the best, that she was just being a devoted daughter. I was grieving the man my father used to be, and I didn't want to see the storm brewing right in front of me. Looking back, I can see all the classic signs of what lawyers call undue influence, where someone in a position of trust exerts so much pressure that they completely overpower a vulnerable person's free will. But at the time, all I saw was my sister taking charge. I had no idea she was actually taking everything. The day we buried our father was the hardest of my life. Standing there watching Claire sob, I felt a flicker of unity, of a shared grief that I hoped might bring us closer. I couldn't have been more wrong. Exactly 1 week later, she summoned me to her lawyer's office. There was no gentle lead-in. This lawyer, a man I'd never seen before, slid a document across the polished table. "This is your father's last will and testament," he announced, signed just 6 weeks before he passed. I read it. Then I read it again, the words blurring. The business, the house, the savings, it all went to Claire. My name appeared just once, leaving me a set of his old golf clubs. It was a complete erasure of my life's work and every promise my father had ever made. "This is a mistake," I said, my voice shaking. "This isn't what Dad wanted." Claire's funeral tears were long gone, replaced by a cold, hard glare. "That's his signature, isn't it?" she shot back, pointing to the bottom of the page. He changed his mind. He wasn't happy with you. The signature. It looked perfect. It was my father's familiar, confident script. But that was the problem. It was too perfect. 6 weeks before he died, Dad's hands shook so badly he could barely hold a fork, let alone a pen. He was weak, confused, and heavily medicated. The man I knew in those last weeks couldn't have possibly produced such a flawless signature. I knew it in my gut. This wasn't a will. It was a script. And it was a forgery. My shock turned into a cold, hard rage. I was now facing a legal battle to challenge the will, or what the courts call a will contest. The burden of proof in these cases is entirely on the person making the claim. It was now up to me to prove this document was a complete fraud, even though on the surface it looked perfectly legitimate. Contesting a will is a brutal, soul-crushing process. My new lawyer laid out the grim reality. Courts automatically presume a signed and witnessed will is valid. I had to provide clear and convincing evidence to prove it was a forgery, a much higher standard than just raising suspicion. So we started digging. We gathered every single thing we could find that my father had ever signed. Old checks, letters, birthday cards, anything to show what his real signature looked like over the years. All while the legal bills piled up. Claire, of course, was using the estate's money, our father's money, to fight me at every turn. It felt hopeless. I was on the verge of bankruptcy, on the verge of just giving up. One night, drowning in boxes of my father's old paperwork, I was ready to throw in the towel. I was numbly flipping through a stack of his most recent bank statements, my heart aching with every little transaction. And that's when I saw it. Tucked inside was a single canceled check. It was made out to a local pharmacy for $12.84. It was completely insignificant, but the signature. My breath caught in my throat. It was almost a crawl, spidery, weak, and trembling across the signature line. It was the signature of a man whose body was failing him. It was the honest signature of my dying father. And it was dated just 1 day after he had supposedly signed that perfectly written will. Suddenly, it all clicked. This tiny $12 check was everything. This was the smoking gun. Forgers are obsessed with making the big signature look perfect, but they forget about the little everyday things that tell the real story. Claire was so focused on creating a masterpiece for the will, she never thought that a small check for a prescription would be what brought her down. When I showed my lawyer the check, his entire demeanor changed. "This is it," he said. "Now we bring in an expert." He put me in touch with a forensic document examiner, a specialist in handwriting analysis. These experts are trained to see the microscopic details the rest of us miss. I met the expert, Dr. Alistair, in her lab, which was full of microscopes and high-tech scanners. I laid out everything, the flawless forged will, and our mountain of my father's real signatures, with the $12 check sitting right on top. For weeks, she analyzed every stroke. She explained that forensic analysis is a science. No two people write exactly alike, and even your own signature changes slightly every time. A forger trying to copy someone else's handwriting can't help but leave clues behind. Her final report was a bombshell. Under a microscope, she showed me the signature on the will. She pointed out tiny hesitation marks and unnatural pen lifts, microscopic pauses where the forger had stopped to check their work. The ink pressure was too even, a sign of someone drawing slowly, not signing with the natural, fluid motion. It was, just as I'd suspected, too perfect. Then, she put it next to the signature from the $12 check. The difference was stunning. The check signature was full of tremors, the lines shaky but written with a natural speed and rhythm. Dr. Alistair explained it would be physically impossible for someone to produce the shaky signature from the check one day and the flawless one on the will the very next day, especially given Dad's documented medical condition. She concluded with a high degree of professional certainty. The signature on the will was a forgery. In court, Dr. Alistair's testimony was the nail in the coffin. She calmly walked the jury through her findings, blowing up images of the signatures for everyone to see. There was the perfect signature from the will, with all its hidden flaws, right next to the shaky but genuine signature from the check. Claire's lawyer tried to discredit her, but she dismantled his arguments with pure science. The jury saw the truth. The judge declared the will invalid, a product of fraud. The moment the verdict came in, I didn't feel the rush of victory I expected, just a deep, profound sadness. I'd won back my inheritance, but I'd lost my sister forever. The court could restore my father's wishes, but it couldn't restore my family. I'm sharing this story as a warning. Betrayal often comes from the people closest to you, especially when everyone is grieving and vulnerable. If you find yourself in a situation where something feels deeply wrong, where a document just doesn't sit right, don't ignore that feeling. Trust your gut. Collect everything, document everything, and get legal advice. Sometimes, the proof you need to expose a massive lie isn't some grand conspiracy, but a small, overlooked detail, like a shaky signature on a $12 check. This journey has been incredibly difficult, and I know many others have faced their own heartbreaking family disputes. If you've been through something similar, I'd be interested to hear your story in the comments. What have you learned, and what advice would you give to someone else facing this nightmare?